Today we are discussing the assassination of former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, which has shocked the world yesterday. And we also saw an outpouring of grief and dismay from world leaders. And we also saw India and the Indian Prime Minister reaching out to the people of Japan and expressing their own dismay over the assassination. Ambassador Tahir, how do you look at this assassination which has shocked the world, especially happening in a country like Japan where normally gun violence is real, political violence is rare? How do you see all this panning out?
There are two issues here. One, as you said, gun violence is rare in Japan, and even this gun which was used was a homemade gun by a 41-year-old man. And political violence is also rare in Japan. That is one part of this whole very tragic development. And the second is that if we look at the post-Second World War history of democratic Japan, it has really not had very strong leaders. In the 70 years or so since, let us say, 1950, Japan has had almost 30 prime ministers in 72 years since 1950, once the United States occupation forces gave full powers to Japan. And in that, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe led his Liberal Democratic Party to 3 election victories in 2012, 2016 and 2020, and was the longest tenure Prime Minister of Japan. In 2 terms, it was almost 9 years. That is one part of his importance to Japan as well as to the world. And the other part is that many Japanese leaders, prime ministers have been very inward looking, that they focus only on Japanese economy, Japanese progress and Japanese prosperity. But Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had a global vision. He very clearly realized that given the trajectory of the growth of China, Japan will not be able to contain China either strategically or economically. And since even in his first term, 2007, he was the first person to promote this concept of confluence of 2 oceans, which we remember as he spoke in India's parliament, and the concept of Indo-Pacific, concept of Quad. He identified countries and regions where, or those who could be helpful to Japan in Japan's own strategic growth and strategic stability. So he had a very wide vision. He had personal friendships with all the global leaders, and that's why his name is very well known. It's a household name in India, for instance. And that's why we see outpouring of grief from all political parties in India as well as in other parts of the world.
Mr. Pal, we've also seen that Prime Minister Modi tweeted and then he's written extensively about his friendship with Shinzo Abe, and the Prime Minister has also brought into context how the India-Japan relationship also flourished as the friendship between the 2 leaders. And as you pointed out, Shinzo Abe was also instrumental in bringing or in reviving the Indo-Pacific policy, which we see being discussed and talked about today. And also some commentators have felt that under him, conversation which involved India and Japan much more passionately. Do you agree with this, that Shinzo Abe increasing this strategic dialogue and this friendship between the 2 nations?
Very much so. India-Japan relations have been very strong since 1950s, but the foundation of the relationship was economic as well as aid-based, because there's a lot of official development assistance from Japan to India, and we all remember metro and so many other things. But with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, even in his first term, when he was Prime Minister in 2007-8, and he came to India, the entire concept of quadrilateral security dialogue was really a Japanese proposal. Then confluence of 2 oceans, so that he linked Indian Ocean and Pacific Ocean security and strategic interests together. Before that, the global term used was Asia Pacific. And now we see more and more the use of the term Indo-Pacific, and again the credit goes to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. He also started this practice of annual summits with the Prime Ministers of India. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi and late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, they shared a vision for a peaceful, prosperous Indo-Pacific. They shared a vision for free and independent and open Indo-Pacific and all the oceans. And they also shared a vision that China needs to be contained, otherwise it could become a very destabilizing force for all the democracies of the region. And they had a personal chemistry. Prime Minister Modi and late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had this understanding. And even in 24th of May, when our Prime Minister Modi was in Tokyo for the Quad Summit, he took time and he met former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. That shows the high regard which Prime Minister Modi had for late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe.
Versatile, we also saw that the Quad, and it's a rare gesture by the Quad. We saw a joint statement coming out by the leaders of the Quad, that is the leaders of the US, India and Australia, expressing their dismay over the assassination of ex-Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. One, how significant is the fact that you find the Quad nations standing together in their grief for the assassination of Shinzo Abe? And two, as you yourself mentioned, Shinzo Abe was one of those first leaders who realized the potential that China had to grow aggressively, and that was one of the reasons he pushed for the Quad. And he was also very outspoken, and in his policies it was quite clear that he wanted countries to come together to counter an increasingly aggressive China. How do you see the Quad statement?
The statement by the leaders of Quad, Australian Prime Minister and Japanese Prime Minister, President Joe Biden and our Prime Minister Sri Modi, is a recognition of the fact that this Quad security dialogue really has been initiated by Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. In his first term, it did not gather much steam, but in his second term, it became a very potent force in the Indo-Pacific region. And if we look at the worldview of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and the kind of policies he was trying to implement in Japan and through their ties, there are 3-4 points which are very important, and Quad would welcome if those policies are continued. One, that Japan will keep on increasing their defense spending. And two, that Japan will get more active in regional alliances. Like Quad is like a regional security dialogue. Then we saw that Prime Minister Kishida participated in the NATO summit in Madrid on 29-30 June. So Prime Minister Abe also wanted that Japan should share more military responsibility in the region, and he wanted that Japan should expand relations with other major democratic powers of Indo-Pacific, India and Australia. And that is his legacy, and Quad leaders would very much appreciate if the future leadership of Japan continues on this path. And of course, we all know that Prime Minister Abe was keen to amend the Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, which restricts Japan's defense exposure. And in 2015, Prime Minister Abe's cabinet and Diet had authorized overseas combat missions for the Japanese self-defense forces, for collective self-defense. So in many ways, the Prime Minister Abe was pursuing a policy in which the Japanese self-defense forces would have become stronger and would have become more active in cooperating with the forces of friendly countries, allied countries, for the collective self-defense of not only Japan, but the Indo-Pacific region. And that is the legacy the Quad members would like the new leadership of Japan to continue.
Versatile, we also see that India declared one day of national mourning today over the assassination of Shinzo Abe. And that also shows India's deep dismay and grief at the assassination which took place yesterday. Versatile, how do you see going forward? Do you feel that what we call Abenomics, or the fact that Shinzo Abe is one of those first post-Second World War prime ministers of Japan who sought to change the pacifist attitude of Japan, he sought to increase the defense budget. Do you feel that going forward, Abe's legacy or the policies that he brought in, tried to bring in, will also affect the Japanese domestic domestic policies and Japan's relationship with other nations in the years to come?
The foundation of India-Japan friendship of today is a very strong sense of friendship between the people of India, the masses of India, and the people of Japan. We very remember and salute, Subhash Chandra Bose's association with Japan and all that. Then India never sought any war reparations from Japan, and Buddhist connection is there. So there are many points where in history where people of Japan have stood by India and people of India have stood by Japan. So that is a very strong foundation. We have no baggage of history. For instance, many Japanese before the Second World War had colonized many Asian countries and they have some negative sentiments towards Japan. But people of India are very friendly towards Japan. And then in the journey of growth and development of India, Japan has been a very strong partner. We all remember Maruti Suzuki car, Delhi Metro, millions of people use every day. Now this high-speed train which is being constructed between Mumbai and Ahmedabad, as well as the freight corridors. So Japan is trying to strengthen India's infrastructure so that become Atmanirbhar, so that we have our own Make in India. So it is not just a commercial relationship which Japan and Japanese companies have with India. And that vision, that roadmap was really prepared in the mind of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, which Japan is following. And that's why we see this acknowledgement of his role, and we share the grief of the people of Japan, and that's why the flag was lowered for today, and people of India are genuinely grieving on this very tragic and untimely loss of a leader of not only Japan but of the region and the world.
Ambassador Kyle, when we look forward now after the Shinzo Abe assassination and we look forward at the India-Japan relationship, how do you feel this relationship going forward can strengthen or it can build on the foundations that Shinzo Abe laid as the Japanese Prime Minister?
What former Prime Minister late Shinzo Abe did with India's leadership, and particularly in the last 7-8 years, is to build both a strategic relationship with India as well as strengthen much more the economic relationship, the trade relationship. For the first time, we have now a civil nuclear agreement with Japan. Earlier, Japan was not ready to sign the civil nuclear deal with India, as India is a non-signatory for the non-proliferation treaty. But going forward, Japan and India need to work together on how to strengthen peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region, how to work together in the format of Quad security dialogue so that more and more democratic countries of Indo-Pacific become associated with this dialogue, and also how more Japanese investment can come to India, because for India a major problem, major challenge is employment generation for our youth, and Prime Minister Abe was really pushing Japanese companies to invest in India more and more, and we hope that the government support, the government push for relocating Japanese companies from say China to other countries, particularly to India, would continue, and that will in the long term strengthen India's economy and will also make the democratic countries of Indo-Pacific, of Asia, stronger, bringing India, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, etc. together.
And in the coming days, we will continue our discussions on the India-Japan relationship. With these comments, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.